StreamYard is what you use.
Yeah.
We are live.
Okay, great.
Okay. Welcome and good evening. My name is Ariana Figueroa, and I'm the health coach for Integrative Family Medicine of Asheville. And tonight's panel discussion is a part of our free monthly community class series. We are so grateful to be hosting tonight at Wrongways River Lodge here in Asheville, North Carolina. And our topic tonight is What's Up with Erections? Having the hard talk about erectile dysfunction. Erectile dysfunction is relevant to many, but difficult to discuss. So we are particularly grateful to have these three experts leading a conversation into this subject. Dr. Susie Gronsi, here in the middle, has specialized in men's pelvic and sexual health for over a decade. She is a licensed doctor of physical therapy, certified pelvic rehabilitation practitioner, a certified sexuality educator and sexuality counselor, an international teacher, author, and owner of an exclusive men's pelvic and sexual health clinic here in Asheville, North Carolina.
Thank you.
And Lainey Gibbons is a licensed occupational therapist and certified pelvic health specialist. She embodies a holistic approach to care and considers the whole person to help them get back to what is meaningful in life. Her goal is to help people connect with and regain function and confidence in their own bodies, especially down there. Dr. Brian Lewis has over 20 years of experience in integrative medicine. He enjoys supporting patients with a holistic approach to their health goals. He draws from lifestyle, herbal, mind-body, and conventional Western medical approaches. And he is the co-founder and medical director of Integrative Family Medicine of Asheville.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
So without further ado, let's dive into the conversation with kind of just this broad, big question of erectile dysfunction is incredibly common, and nearly all men experience it at some point in their lives. Can you explain when this is something to look into and how this may be an early warning sign of other things going on?
Sure.
Let's start with Brian with this one.
Sure.
Yeah.
So each of us is going to lead off on these questions. We'll kind of rotate through as we go. So I'll start and then hand the baton over. I often joke with my male patients that erectile dysfunction is an early warning sign. And that's all jokes aside, it usually is the opportunity when men are very motivated to make a change. Stereotypically, guys don't come in until their wife, mom, daughter, somebody else makes them, or unless something is so broken that they can't limp along with it anymore. Well, in this circumstance, all puns intended, sorry, I have bad humor. When a man comes in with erectile dysfunction, very often it's something that they've mulled about for a while. Turns out that by age 40, somewhere between 40 to 50% of guys are having some degree of erectile dysfunction. Depending on which expert you want to talk to, by 40, it's 40%, 50, 50%, 60, 60%. That's a rough guesstimate just to make it easy to remember. So it's incredibly common. When we talk about how many men will talk to their practitioner about it, it's about 30%. So that means a lot of people are out there suffering in silence. Then how many people actually talk to their partner about it? Of men that are suffering, really about 40% even mention it to their partner. So most guys that have this are very quiet about it and don't talk to anybody. So by the time they come into the clinic, whether it's my clinic or their clinic, and they're talking about this, it's taken a lot to get to that place. They're usually very self-conscious, and they don't know how common it is. So one of the acronyms that's often used to remember like how this comes about is VENT, V-E-N-T. It stands for vascular, endocrine, neuro, and then traumatic, okay? And when we think about that acronym, it's like what's going on in the vasculature, in the genitals, what's going on endocrine-wise, it's hormonal. This also could be related to blood sugar, so diabetes. Neuropathic, this could be related to, again, diabetes or other neurologic conditions, autoimmune conditions, things like that. Traumatic, that's kind of self-explanatory. But we tend to think about these things isolated, but it's worth looking at the bigger picture. None of these things are actually isolated. So when we look at the other thing, which people talk about those first four, the VENT, as being organic, means it's like a medical, physical thing. They talk about psychogenic, as if it's something separate from the organic, which is not true. Because we also know if someone's in a difficult relationship, going through stress in their life, don't feel safe in intimacy for a variety of reasons, their testosterone is going to be lower. They're going to have trouble shifting into the state of the autonomic system. That's part of your central autonomic nervous system to be able to get an erection. And there's a blunt phrase that we learned in medical school, point and shoot, to learn how the autonomic nervous system works. Okay? Point for parasympathetic is to get an erection. You have to be able to relax to get an erection. Shoot is ejaculation. That's sympathetic, S for that. So sometimes we see guys who are so nervous that they can't relax to get their erection. And typically speaking, once it happens to a guy's once, they're all in their head. They're spinning out. Like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? And once you get into that cycle, it's a vicious loop. You can't calm down to be able to get an erection. And you have to go parasympathetic. Parasympathetic is rest, digest, relax to be able to have an erection. And then you meet guys that they have premature ejaculation. They're so anxious and so wound up. They're so sympathetic driven. In other words, they're more activated mode that they're going to ejaculate early because that's the dominant tone that they're in. So
can I make sure that we're grasping all of these pieces?
Sure.
Because what I'm hearing you say is that there are so many factors that can play into erectile dysfunction that it's incredibly common, but only a fraction of the people who are experiencing erectile dysfunction ever say anything. And that in terms of early warning signs, because of the fact that erectile dysfunction can be connected to vascular system, to endocrine system, to like different parts of what's happening inside the body, it's an important thing to pay attention to, not just because of sexual well-being and mental and sexual health and wellness, but also because of what it can be a symptom of. Right. Can you speak more to that, what it can be a warning sign of, like that component?
Yeah, that's a very good summary. And then I want to hand the baton off to you all, because you know a lot about this.
I'm rather hard of hearing. Can you all speak a little louder?
Yes, sir.
Sure.
Thank you for saying something.
Yeah, thanks. I'll definitely try to speak up. And so another way of phrasing this is when someone comes in with erectile dysfunction, it's taken a lot for them to get there because most guys don't. And it's a real opportunity to say, we need to look at the rest of your health. We need to look at risk of diabetes, risk of heart disease. The psychogenic component often gets put to the side, but it's really part of the whole picture. We're going to look at your hormones. We're going to look at the safety in the home, stress in your life, all of these things that contribute to whole person health, which is really what contributes to healthy sexual function. And so I take erectile dysfunction as an opportunity to look at the whole person health. And very often by addressing that, you can cure it. It doesn't always have to be a pill. And when you can cure it by looking at the whole person, by addressing blood sugars and various other things, you're preventing heart disease, you're preventing stroke, you're preventing cancers and various other things. So for guys, it's really an opportunity that gets them in the door, that you can address all the other things that stereotypically guys tend to ignore.
So in other words, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, whether or not there's stressors and lack of safety in the home, all of that can be kind of just a warning sign, right? That's found in the erectile dysfunction component.
Yeah, and Cialis does not fix work stress.
No, nor does it fix not feeling safe in a relationship or having lower testosterone because of all of the above.
Yeah, a testosterone injection is not going to fix your, your atherosclerosis in your vessels.
Yeah.
So, you want to treat it appropriately given all of the influences that cause erectile dysfunction.
Makes a lot of sense. Susie, Lainey, do you want to jump in?
For this particular question?
Is there anything you want to add to how erectile dysfunction can be an early warning sign, or is there anything else that you want to add? And it's okay if not, we can segue.
There's one point I do want to also emphasize on what Dr. Brian was talking about is normalizing changes with erectile function as your body changes as well. So there are going to be some changes as far as the amount of stimulation needed, other novelties, and expanding your sexual repertoire menu to include different types of sensory stimulation, both physically and mentally. And waxing and waning of an erection, which is often not talked about, because what's really talked about is a hard penis is a penis that only deserves pleasure in that way. Waxing and waning of an erection is actually a very normal process and very healthy throughout a sexual experience. But in our social cultural world, we are not told that narrative. What we're told is that the expectation should be a penis should be hard, should be ready to go at any time, when we want it, how we want it, and nothing else matters. And that script actually should be challenged quite a bit, because that actually isn't normal. It's not separate from you as a person living in your body and in your world and relationships. So I just wanted to talk about waxing and waning of erections.
No,
Well, especially since did you want to add something?
I very much agree. Like, we think, if only 30% of guys that have this are coming in and talking to someone about it, it means there's 70% of guys out there afraid to do it. And in all the studies, the primary thing is they're embarrassed. So where does that come from? It's this narrative, like, men are supposed to be strong all the time. And if not, what are you? And that keeps guys from seeking the help they need, and keeps them from seeking help that might help with, heart disease and stroke and all this other stuff. They may have hidden diabetes. They may have who knows what. So as Susie's saying, to normalize this is something that's so common. You think about it, by the time you're 50, more people have it than not.
Yeah.
And
I also want to make a comment about our medical community doesn't ask about sex. They don't talk when you go in for a visit. The first question is, they're not talking about your sexual health. Like, how's your sexual health? What changes have you experienced in the past several months that you would like to talk to me about? We know that sex and sexual health is part of the 4 pillars of health, right? Mental health, physical health, spiritual, and sexual are all part of the health paradigm. So it's not just the onus on the individual who's experiencing the distressing concern, but also on the medical community to ask the questions, to allow for that space for that person to lean into a very vulnerable topic and sensitive topic for many people, penis owner or not. But it's really hard to talk about sex, no pun intended. Yeah. It is much easier to just do than to actually communicate what's going on around sex. So it is up to the medical community to destigmatize, to allow for this space so that people can feel that they can share their most intimate concerns without feeling shamed, embarrassed, anxious that they won't receive the medical treatment that they deserve to get because of sexual ambiguity, etc. So those are factors that I think I'm very passionate about also speaking to, that it takes a collective community to really support the men in our lives.
I this is a really beautiful segue into the next question, which is part of what I hear both of you saying so far, although this bigger conversation will continue, is that what is considered normal is not normal. What is considered normal in terms of having an erection that just is consistently hard the entire time, that actually is not normal. And in terms of a smaller percentage of men having this experience, or people, penis owners, I think you said, having this experience, that is also not normal. And so maybe this would be a good time to really open up kind of what is normal and talk about the anatomy and physiology of an erection and an ejaculation as well. Would you be willing to speak to that?
Yeah.
Lainey, take it away.
I can start.
Thank you, Lainey.
With our mascot here. And just to speak, also kind of keep that going on, like the norm, the standard, all of that. We talk about the standard or the average amount of time. We think, yes, a hard penis is the only thing that deserves pleasure. And also it needs to last for a really long time. That's not normal. 15, 20 minutes when the average is 5 minutes. So just to put that into perspective of what we're expecting of our bodies, what penis owners are expecting of their bodies, or partners are expecting, just to put that into perspective of the average.
During intercourse.
Yes, during penetrative intercourse.
I think that's a number that a lot of people probably are shocked to hear.
Yeah.
Why isn't this a part of sexual education?
Well, that's another conversation.
Yeah.
Whole different panel discussion. Okay, we'll be back next week. You were speaking to the anatomy.
Yes, so the anatomy of our pelvic floor, right? And we have our mascot here. So to start off, we have our pelvic bones here on the sides supporting us, and our hips connect here on the sides. So flipping us up are our pelvic floor muscles underneath. So here we kind of have a triangle of muscles at the base of the penis. these are like a superficial layer of muscle that are important for peeing, pooping, and more importantly, while we're all here, erections. So these help to achieve an erection. And then we have another set of muscles back here around the anus, a deeper layer of muscles, the levator ani. So our pelvic floor muscles serve quite a few functions for us, right? They, again, help with peeing, pooping, and sex. They keep things in that need to be in and allow us to release things when we need to do that. They also, as you can see, when this pelvis is upright, they support us, right? And they support our internal organs. So they're kind of like a sling that holds our internal organs in place. So don't worry, this doesn't happen in the practice, but I will take this apart and show you a side view just so you get the inside of what this looks like. So here we have our bladder, prostate, and rectum. So our pelvic floor muscles are supporting, holding all of those things up, right? And if we take those out, our pelvic floor muscles again, but you can see all of the vascular and nerve structures in here, the yellow, the nerves. So much coming down into this area and down into the penis, right? Those nerves go all the way into the penis. Now the penis, which I think you have the other half of, right? Okay, we just have half right here, but there are 3 pieces of tissue that make up the penis. So 2 larger pieces of tissue here that sit side by side, and one below that houses the urethra. Now this is highly vascularized tissue, which is why blood flow is so important for erection. So the smaller piece of tissue on the bottom becomes the glands of the penis, the head of the penis. So you can see how much goes into this area, you know, the nerves, the blood flow, the supporting of our, you know, organs that attach to that area. And that's pretty much my summary of our pelvic floor and genitals. And Susie might want to do a little bit more with the physiology.
What happens? How does an erection even happen? It's like magic. But there's an orchestra of events that occur, and all in this beautiful symphony from the brain all the way down to the tissues and then back up again. So as Lainey already pointed out, we have the genital structures, we have the nerves, the muscles, the organs, but the biggest sex organ is sitting between your ears right now. It is the brain. So what happens when arousal, genital or psychogenic arousal occurs? So something that you see visually, you hear, you taste, you smell, if that's your thing, or touch, those sensory cues can start to activate a biological, neurophysiological process that the brain jumpstarts. And that message goes all the way down through the spinal cord, activating nerve endings that supply the penis. The nerve endings to the penis then release certain neurochemicals to allow the arteries in the penis to dilate, to relax, so that blood flow can rush in. Now, as the blood flow rushes into the penis, that increases the pressure of the penis, which means as those 3 pieces of tissues that are like inflatable balloons get more swollen and bigger and filled with blood, they start to press on the veins associated with the penis, and that helps to prevent backflow. So it's the pressure increase in the penis stimulated by an orchestra of neurophysiological chemicals activating a relaxation of the arteries in the penis, causing an increase in pressure, pressing on the veins to prevent backflow. Now, the muscles around the penis help to support the angle of the erection and also to help maintain compression against the veins. But it is not the only thing that's involved with maintaining an erection. In fact, the neurophysiology has a lot more to do with that than actual muscle contraction. Now, with ejaculation, as Dr. Bryan already alluded to, ejaculatory control issues being driven more by that fight or flight nervous system response. once the person is ready to climax or reaching that point of inevitability for ejaculation, the nervous system switches gears. Muscles rhythmically start to contract here in the pelvic region to help expel or move fluid out of the prostatic urethra, the prostate area, and through the actual penile urethra to come out. So these muscles involuntarily contract and relax to help pump fluid out, essentially. But again, the brain is involved in that orchestra of events. That's a reflex that happens, but the brain is flooded with so much information because that's a buildup of sexual energy that the brain then, the autonomic nervous system switches from rest and digest and relax from that erection process to let's have a party. Okay, fireworks, right? But here's the thing. Sex doesn't always have to end in that extravagant array or theatrics of an orgasm or ejaculation. I mean, you can experience a full body, very pleasurable moment of sensuality and eroticism without having ejaculation. Ejaculation is a reflex, a spinal reflex. The orgasm is a subjective, a psychogenic process of pleasure, peak pleasure in that moment in time. So ejaculation, while it happens in synchrony with your experience of orgasm, you could still experience an orgasm without ejaculation. So I just wanted to point that out. And related to parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems, why it might be difficult if we're worried, scared, embarrassed, if we have pain in this part of our body, if we have conflict in our relationship, that tends to create more distance with our sexual voices, our ability to stay mindful and absorbed in our own experiences. Why? Because there's so much pressure around performing, and there's expectations around that pressure, which literally inhibit or stop these processes, these natural physiological processes from doing their job. So relaxation is crucial, or physiological relaxation is crucial to get an erection to begin with.
So what I hear you saying, and I just want to make sure that the scope of that, because this is a really broader, I mean, even more so than I'd understood, and more nuanced and complicated than I think it's usually talked about. So in terms of the anatomy of ejaculation, you demonstrated with the pelvic example. But in terms of the complex interplay between brain, cardiovascular system, musculature in the pelvic floor, all of those pieces, where the brain is at has a huge impact.
Yes.
And so, that was actually the next question I was going to ask is how does the emotional and mental component impact the process of erection and ejaculation, but also how can people work with that component? Because I think that's a piece that is really difficult. So how, starting with Brian, I guess, we'll come back around.
Sure.
How do you counsel patients?
Yeah. So I think guys, once it happens, almost every guy I've talked to, they get worried.
Yeah.
And it's not always well received by their partner, actually. Worst case scenarios, their partner is putting them down or ripping on them a little bit. And I've seen that a fair number of times. Best case scenario is when their partner is supportive and understanding and realizes that this is a normal occurrence, that erections during intercourse are 5 to 7 minutes. That's kind of where that erections are supposed to go up and go down and up and down over a course of foreplay and sensuality. That's a healthy situation. Not everybody's got that. And so the first thing is starting to normalize it and putting guys at ease. The next thing is to say, where did you pick up your idea of what sex is supposed to look like? Probably came off of magazines or porn or wherever they looked, friends in the locker room or who knows where. But to say, let's shift gears a little bit from orgasmic focused, goal-driven sex to intimacy, sensuality. Let's diversify your palate a little bit. Let's kind of like, why don't you try learning some things to share pleasure with your partner? And report back, see how that goes. There's some various books of people who specialize in these things. And I think that a lot of the guys that I've talked to who don't have an organic cause, or by organic, I mean, it's not cardiovascular, diabetes, neurologic, one of those things.
Hormonal, et cetera.
Yeah. Sometimes just focusing on something else and getting engaged with their partner, like, oh, plumbing started working. I just put my attention somewhere else and look at that. And then they started to feel better.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I will give guys a bottle of Viagra or Cialis. It's one of the phosphodiesterase inhibitors. We'll get into that in a moment, how those work.
Mhm.
But and I'm like, let's just put this by your bed. I don't really think you need it. I think every we've checked you out cardiovascularly, no diabetes, no testosterone, great. I think it's mostly up here and here with your partner.
Mhm.
So let's put this by your bed. Maybe you take it, maybe you don't. See how it goes. And it's just there. And maybe they do take it the first time and then they forget. And then everything works and they're like, I'm all right. And so, the topic is bigger than could be discussed in a 5-minute answer.
Yeah.
But normalizing it, giving them a backup plan, diversifying the palette, focusing on intimacy and sensuality rather than like the goal-driven rocket ship to whatever.
Which is also a shift from sympathetic mode, from stress and anxiety and worry and fear to curiosity, playfulness, intimacy, connection,
Totally.
which are what help us shift into parasympathetic mode for us to digest. I mean, just that is part of that, that system. So normalizing, checking in to see how can you open the aperture and be more curious, playful, connect with your partner. And then potentially, if needed, have Viagra or something like that there as a tool to utilize if needed.
Yeah, there are a number of, Viagra is probably one of the most common things because there are all sorts of ads about it. But everybody knows about that, especially after it went generic. But there's so many things that can work and help.
And that's where these experts can dive into. Anything you want to add or expand upon in terms of the mental and emotional component?
Yes.
Please.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think, obviously expanding our definition of intimacy, like Dr. Brian said, and then body awareness, right? So yes, we want to connect maybe with a partner, communicate, be intimate with a partner, but it starts with ourselves, right? So connecting with ourselves, and then those senses that we mentioned that cause arousal, right? The seeing, hearing, touching, being able to really be present with yourself and what you're feeling, what you're sensing in the moment. Sounds really simple. I think we all know it can be rather challenging sometimes, especially when something like a penis that's so important and vulnerable to us is not working the way that we have been taught that it is supposed to work, or that we would like for it to work. Really, bringing ourselves back to all of the other things that we are sensing to kind of bring, refocus back to ourselves. And then, of course, bringing in that communication piece with a partner. But I just think sensory awareness and body awareness in general is so important to connect back to ourselves and to that part of our body.
Getting out of the story in the mind and getting back into the physical sensations in the body.
Exactly. Whatever that might mean for you. Maybe that's some movement. Maybe that's meditation, mindfulness, just some deep breathing. It can be a whole host of things. A nice conversation where you're really present with someone that you care about and that you trust. It can be a wide variety of things, but really, getting back into your body, I think, is a really important aspect of this.
And maybe taking intercourse off the table for a moment in order for all these other things to take the spotlight, right? Because again, the pressures to perform, it's very mechanical and mechanistic. And in my experience working with people who have penises, there's often a lot of effort that goes into sexual scenarios to try to achieve an erection, and literally will physically exhaust themselves. So not only are we talking about the emotional mental pieces, but the physical exhaustion of trying so hard and tensing every part in their body to maintain or sustain an erection in that moment is really robbing them of the experience to stay absorbed in their own experience of pleasure for what that is. So these processes do exhaust, like muscles get tired, right? So, if masturbation is part of someone's sexual menu, it shifts from, oh, this felt good and I'm aroused, I'm going to engage with myself in this self-pleasure kind of way, to I'm doing it to check, right? So there's a behavior around the fear and the worry and the anxiety that starts to create more distance for someone's sexual voice and sexuality and within the relationship. And certainly, as Lainey and Dr. Bryan have already mentioned, the communication aspects around sexual health concerns are the biggest challenge for a lot of individuals, is to just talk about it, to name what's coming up for them. That in and of itself can ease a lot of the pressure around this conversation, to let your partner in, to lean on your partner as an erotic friend and an ally rather than a stranger or someone to avoid because of those feelings of shame and embarrassment that do come up. And that's normal. I also want to say that's normal. I mean, it's normal to feel worried. It's normal to feel scared and anxious about a part of your body that you've identified with for so long, that has been a trusty friend of yours for so long, and now it's changing. And so there's some grief there. There's a bit of loss. It has much more to do than just the mechanical parts. It actually has a lot to do with, wow, what does this mean for me as a man who has a penis and identifies with this penis and has had a relationship for so long in such a way, and now that's changing. And what does that mean for me and my identity and my definition of masculinity and what that means for me, right? So that piece is huge and very worth stepping into that space to allow that conversation to occur for people.
Yeah. So what I hear from all three of you on this question before we move on is normalizing, widening the scope, having the ability to get back into the body and out of the story of the mind, connecting with a partner as an ally instead of a stranger or somebody who's standing in judgment, and then really digging into connecting to self and identity and pulling that piece in as well. So we actually received some questions in advance to be asked, and so this is one of those. I see a lot on YouTube. Are there actually exercises to improve erection reliability and quality? And I think that probably y'all should start on that one.
Was this passing the baton
Yes.
to me?
Okay. Passing the pelvis.
Yeah, passing the pelvis. Yes. So, yes. Now, Susie and I will be the first to tell you that we are not your conventional therapists, right? I'm not going to give you like 3 exercises 10 times, do them 3 times a day. That there's really not evidence to support that. So while there are exercises like we talked about with the muscles here at the base of the penis, right? The contracting and relaxing those. To be honest, most of the men that we see, we're working more on either muscle coordination or relaxation. A lot of times we think, okay, I can't achieve or maintain an erection, so these muscles must be weak. I've got to bulk these up. I've just got to hold these, and I'm just going to hold them for a really long time, right? And again, that can result in some fatigue and some decreased coordination, right? So we need to coordinate our breath, our movements, our contractions, relaxation. So yes, there are specific pelvic floor contractions and relaxation techniques that you can use. It depends on the person, for more importantly, but movement is medicine, right? So I mentioned that the tissue here is highly vascularized. We need blood flow to this area to get an erection, to maintain an erection. We need blood flow. And what gives blood flow to that area? Movement. Even before intimacy, get up and go for a walk, do some jumping jacks, get your blood pumping, right? Get blood flow to that area in order to participate in whatever form of intimacy you want to, if that's something that you're interested in. So yes, movement is medicine, pelvic floor contractions and relaxation. And then as far as, we talked about body awareness, we do a lot of mindfulness, right? Body brain connection, our body and brain very much connected. Even some gentle breathing with hands on your genitals, right? Reconnect with that area of your body. We often ask, how connected to this part of your body do you feel, right? So really starting to integrate some of that body-brain connection to again, refocus that energy on the self and connecting those parts to be able to participate in intimacy in the ways that you want to.
So do you have?
Yeah, go ahead.
Shall I pass? Sorry,
It's just only I feel comforted when I have my pelvis here. It is very comforting because I speak from the pelvis. Okay. Yeah, so those exercises, thank you, Lainey. Exactly. So there are some specific pelvic isolated exercises you can do. And again, coordinating that with functionality. So are there certain positions that you find more comfortable in your body to be in during intimacy? Hands and knees, tall kneeling. Do we need to talk about props or other sexual resources like vibrators? Yes, they're not just for clitorises. They also can be very helpful for penises who are struggling with getting varied stimulation or need just a little bit more stimulation to activate nerve endings. So that's one reason you can call it penile vibratory stimulation if you want to keep it more medical. But a vibrator is a thing, and it can actually be very, very it can be interesting experience for penis owners to feel different stimulation and then use that as part of their sexual repertoire. And then talking about varying from intercourse to varied stimulation. So intercourse for a little bit, varied stimulation with hand sex, mouth sex, vibrator, and then doing some intercourse so that you can kind of get that varied stimulation, because we know that is necessary and normal to need a little bit more of that to bring in some novelty and a little extra spice to things. Because I don't know about you, but I kind of am a creature of habit, and I like to get into a routine, and then it just becomes a routine. Like there's no fun in it, right? It becomes mundane. It's like I do this thing, okay. It's not exciting anymore, right? So it's like, how do we build up some sexual energy and excitement, which guess what? Is going to activate your brain and your nerves, and they're going to fire more, and nerves are going to be more sensitive in your penis, and all of that matters. So again, wrapping up all the physical exercises with the mental exercises, which are actually physical processes, because thoughts, beliefs, emotions, they are physical processes. They are biological processes. They are not some abstract woo-woo thing we talk about over here, right, Dr. Brian? It's like they are physical processes. So I like to remind people of that, even though we can't, take them out and look at them and, dissect them like we would a pelvis.
I have one more thing. Just when you mentioned mental exercise, I just have to do my little OT plug here. Habits, routines, patterns are just so incredibly important in a lot of aspects of our lives, but especially this. And, I like to use the example of if you are someone who masturbates, right? If you are masturbating, like you have been taught it has to be quick, it needs to be hidden, it needs to be a very specific way. We are doing something to our body there and then expecting a different pattern when we engage in intimacy with a partner. That's not really, that's not how patterns and routines work. So again, just kind of a mental exercise is just ask yourself, what are my habits around sexual intimacy with myself or with a partner? What are my routines? How might I be able to either shift or kind of move those two polar, opposites to the middle and reach some sort of compromise to then, be able to engage the way that I want to. That's my
Thank you.
That's a good point.
Soapbox on that.
Thank you.
No.
We had another question submitted as well. Quote, all my buddies are on T, an erection pill, an injection, or all of the above.
Mhm.
I've borrowed them before and they work. Amazing. I felt like a teenager. I just want something that works fast. Why should I bother with all this other stuff?
Sure. I feel like I should take the
Open to
pelvis.
both.
Yeah,
pass
thanks.
Pass that fella.
No. I've got authority now. So,
So,
okay.
doubly.
Wait, oh my.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. So,
All right.
Yeah. So that is often the way guys are showing up in the clinic. So like, hey, my buddy's got this. I tried it. It works. Give it to me. And yeah, and then I usually will say, okay, well, let's check out your cholesterol. Let's look at your blood sugars. And they're starting to roll their eyes. And then I go for the gusto, because what often it takes is the explanation, but just a little bit of physiology. So in fat tissue, this is usually where this is my standard thing I say. It's like in fat tissue, there's an enzyme called aromatase. Aromatase will convert testosterone into estrogen. And if I give you testosterone without losing weight, you're going to make a lot of estrogen. And what's that going to do? It's going to give you probably things you don't want, And so that usually gets guys' attention. And then, we mentioned Viagra, there's Cialis, and there's two others. These are what are called phosphodiesterase inhibitors. And that's an enzyme that's involved in the production of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a vasodilator. And it turns out we have multiple different versions of this enzyme in our body. Viagra was discovered by accident. It's supposed to be a blood pressure medication. The backstory is they just happened to notice that people who were in not the placebo arm of the trial, but were getting the active medication were having more erections. And when they were done with the trial, they're like, give us back the medications. And they noticed that the people who were in the control arm didn't give their medication back. And they're like, we should probably look into this, okay? Because for blood pressure, it actually didn't work very well, okay? And so, which leads to another question around, so testosterone, what does it actually do for erections? So it does do things for your sex drive, for your confidence, for goal-directed behavior. Turns out these muscles in the bottom of your pelvis have a lot of androgen receptors. And as we get older, we tend to lose muscle. It's a process called sarcopenia, loss of muscle. And if your testosterone is going down, you're going to start to get some muscle wasting in your pelvic floor. And these muscles are important. And as Susie was saying, the blood comes in through the artery, and it's like a cul-de-sac, and it presses out on the veins that are on the outside. So it's like blocking the cul-de-sac. And if the muscles are starting to waste, you can't press against the veins. You get what's called venous leak. So the blood's going in, but it's leaking out the base. And that's going to lead to erections that aren't as firm or as last as long. Okay, so if your testosterone is higher, you're going to have a little more muscle mass in there that's going to help with maintaining the erection by helping to prevent the venous leak. So usually it's around a total testosterone level of around 3 to 200. Below that, you're going to start to see some potential muscle differences that might affect erections. So guys are like, great, give me that testosterone. I'm like, well, hold on a second. And they're like, well, I've heard about andropause. I'm hip. I'm listening to the podcast. I know about this. So what is andropause? Andropause is thought to be the male equivalent of menopause. And there are some things to it, but it's not true that guys are fated to have low testosterone as we get older. It's actually not true. Healthy males that are exercising, have a good diet, getting sleep, you actually can maintain a pretty good testosterone as you age. Guys in their 80s, potentially even in their 90s. So that brings us to the larger question around lifestyle. So before guys want to go on testosterone, I usually have them do a lifestyle intervention. And more often than not, if we clean up their diet, get them sleeping, deal with stress, and just get them exercising, doing some compound muscle exercises, building muscle mass, that usually will bring their testosterone up to a healthy level and help their erections and prevents heart disease, strokes, and all that other stuff that's my job to help prevent. Okay. And so, again, erectile dysfunction is like this early warning sign, or what are you doing with yourself? What's going on in your life? Like, let's take this moment to do the overhaul and see what fixes. Okay. If not, great. We have other options. Cialis does help. Viagra does help. There are other things that do help, but let's take this as an opportunity first.
Sounds like there's a tendency for people to compartmentalize and
Mhm.
come in and say, I have this one problem and I want a solution to this one problem.
Well,
And
they want the quick fix.
yeah,
There-
which makes sense.
And if they've been on the beach trip or the lake trip and their buddy was like, try that, heard that story so many times, and like, I just want that.
Yeah.
And it's generic now. I can get like 90 days for $8.40. I know because I prescribed it today. For somebody. And it's cheap and it works, but it's the cheap fix misses this opportunity for so much more. And you know, there's a doctor, podcasting doctor, that talks about the sacred marketing with medicine. You're like, this is my opportunity. I got to make the pitch. And because, you know, it is like, okay, you're 40, you're 50, this is going on. But if you make these changes now, we're going to prevent all this stuff that's going to happen when you're older. And so what else was on your question? Yeah.
So in this, I want something that works fast. Why should I bother with all this other stuff?
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to make a little plug for, I mentioned podcast. There's a podcast that actually came out this week. And if you didn't catch it, we did this as a little bit of a joke around Father's Day, which just happened, right? Summer solstice, right? It's a dude talk. So somebody else beat us to the punch and put out a Father's Day sexual health podcast before we got to record this. And his name's Peter Attia. You can find him on YouTube. And there was a men's sexual health podcast that came out on Monday. It's excellent. It's 2.5 hours. It goes into much greater detail than we're going to be able to tonight about the physiology of stuff in regards to the biochemistry and things.
And before we start to shift into the next question, I want to check in with Lainey and with Susie.
Yes.
Is there anything that y'all want to add to why people should why people should not just go for tea or Viagra, or is that like one of the quick fixes?
Because eventually, for some people and a lot of people, it stops working.
Oh.
Yeah.
There's a big, it's working in the beginning, great, and then it loses its luster. It stops working, even at higher doses.
Why?
Well, there's multiple factors. If they're not addressing the underlying health concerns,
Fair.
the body can only do what it can do under that particular environment.
Sure.
And then on top of that, if we have relationship dynamics, conflict, mental health struggles, worries, anxieties, performance worry, that also is going to weigh more heavily, especially as you get older. It will weigh more heavily on the situation. So just taking the pill, it's only acting on one very small process of this very gigantic, complex biological symphony that's going on. And it will, your body can only sustain what's already happening. And if what's happening is it's struggling, then it's not going to be able to facilitate the whatever that medication's trying to do.
So it's not just about increasing testosterone, as you were saying, and it's not just about, because, one of the questions we had was, well, okay, whatever, I just want to improve my testosterone, right?
Right.
But it sounds like that's the tip of the iceberg, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just such a complex physiological situation. And so if you don't take into account the mind and the brain and the heart and all of, and whether somebody's exercising and how they're eating and how they're sleeping and how their stress is, then even a quick fix ultimately will be a short-term fix.
Correct.
And won't really get down to the root of what's happening in that person's body.
Correct.
And the truth is that this is something that most people with penises experience, and that long-term sexual health and enjoyment is something that can be enjoyed by people into their 80s and 90s.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
So,
And I think that the point you made is key. It's like, okay, so you borrowed your buddy's Viagra or Cialis, whatever. That's great. You want 3 years supply, sure. But you're going to take in 1 year,
Yeah.
But it will not work for the long haul if their atherosclerosis, which is the blockage in the vessels, is getting worse. If your untreated diabetes is getting worse, and you're getting loss of nerve function going to that area. And all of these things that worsen if you don't address them are eventually going to overwhelm the capacity of the medication.
Yeah.
However, if you do all the good stuff, all the lifestyle measures that we mentioned, which is nutrition, stress management, fitness, and all that, the medications can be helpful, but done as a whole package.
Right.
Exactly.
So the best way to improve testosterone, but also improve sexual health and well-being, is to come at it from this lifestyle perspective, from mind-body connection, from lifestyle interventions, and then if needed, also medications.
I've seen guys like triple their testosterone just by changing their lifestyle. Easy, slam dunk.
Wow.
Yeah. One of my favorite things is like 20-year-old comes in, 20-something. They're having trouble with erectile dysfunction. They're really worried about it because they're in their 20s. They're like, I'm freaking out. What's going on? Check their testosterone. If their total testosterone is fine. So most testosterone is actually bound to proteins in the body, to something called sex hormone binding globulin or albumin. And so 1 to 2% is free and available to do work. Really not much. So I'll look at their free testosterone, like, whoa, it's in the tank. What's going on? So it turns out that certain things will raise this thing called sex hormone binding globulin. So THC, one of the most common things, jacked sex hormone binding globulin up. And so I see they're vaping those THC pens hard. They're coming in. Sex hormone binding globulin's through the roof. Total testosterone fine. Free testosterone's in the basement.
Because it's attaching to the...
Yeah. So I was like, how much you smoking, buddy? They go, I'm like, don't lie to me. Come on. And then it starts this feed forward cycle, because one of the other things that raises sex hormone binding globulin is estrogen. Now, men need estrogen. You drop a man's estradiol, they'll get hot flashes and their sex drive will go in the tank. Men need a certain level of estrogen to function well. But too much estrogen, sex hormone binding globulin goes up, total testosterone, free testosterone goes down, sex function goes down, lean body mass goes down, and you start in this vicious cycle, not in the direction that you want. Yeah.
So what I heard you say is that THC is something that's going to ultimately reduce free testosterone in the body.
It can, yeah.
That just by changing the way someone eats and by exercising more and by reducing stress, optimizing sleep, just that, you've seen people triple their testosterone.
Yeah, so compound exercises that involve large muscle groups. So if you like pull-ups, you're using your biceps, your lats, squats, stuff like that. That'll increase testosterone. Adequate protein, adequate exercise, sleep. Did I say sleep? And
Say it again.
Sleep.
Yeah.
Your glands aren't going to work if you're not sleeping. Simple as that. And then stress management. All the pillars of lifestyle that we talk about every day, and you all talk about every day. Totally can reverse your testosterone problems.
At any age?
Yeah. So, and when I have someone who's doing their best and they're doing all their stuff and they really are banging it on all fronts and it's not coming up, there's a time and a place for testosterone support. But before we go there, we've done all the stuff to help prevent diabetes, heart disease, and all the bad stuff we don't want.
Which again sounds like making sure that you're going to the root and really addressing the big picture of a person's health. Sexual health is one part of the big picture of health. And it's an important part.
Very much so.
But it's interconnected with everything else. I love how earlier, Dr. Gronsky, you were saying that the most important sexual organ is in between our ears. You know, I mean, the cascade, the complicated cascade of what's happening during sex or during arousal, it leans on all of the areas of health. Mental health, emotional health, connection, physical, all of it. Is there anything that y'all want to add to this bit before we kind of maybe bring to a close and open up for
I do have
questions?
one bit, but Lainey, did you?
Go for it.
You passing the pelvis
You
again?
can keep the pelvis for now.
Speaking
So
pelvis.
attached. I have attachment to power to the pelvis with the penis. Medications. So we're talking about medications,
Yes.
and I think it's important to bring up that certain medications do influence sexual desire and sexual function,
Hmm.
particularly certain blood pressure medications,
Mhm.
antidepressants, and even sometimes some prostate medications for BPH can
Very much so.
influence sexual
Yeah.
function. So you looking at the medication list is something I often do, and I can't tell you how many times I see so many medications on this person's list. Polypharmacy, where it's just multiple different medications, and a lot of the symptoms are extensions of side effects from these medications.
Mhm.
So looking into that, and Dr. Brian, I think you might have more
Just,
insight with
I'll-
medications.
I'll reel them off real quick. Okay, so SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, are known for sometimes well, I don't want to give them a bad name, but in some people they can decrease your sex drive and your capacity to have an orgasm. Interestingly enough, they can be used for premature ejaculation. Okay, so that side effect is sometimes therapeutic in certain populations. So there's another class of medications that are used for enlarged prostates. So testosterone is a potent androgen, masculinizing hormone. It can be converted into DHT, dihydrotestosterone, which is about 5 times more potent than plain testosterone. Okay, DHT largely drives the growth of the prostate, and so the enzyme that converts testosterone to DHT, dihydrotestosterone, is called 5-alpha reductase. So there are medications that target that enzyme. They're called 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, and they'll decrease DHT. Well, DHT is a potent androgen. If you decrease DHT too much, it's going to affect your sex drive, your motivation, everything that has an androgen receptor, including the muscles in the bottom of the pelvis. Okay, you don't want to. If you drop your DHT too far, it will likely have some sexual effects. Now, if somebody's needs to really drop their DHT because of prostate cancer or some situation like that, it has its time and its place. They talk about that in that podcast that I mentioned in a lot of detail, actually. So
When I put this recording up on our website, I can link into that.
Sure,
if you
sure.
want, and put it
Yeah,
as
yeah.
a resource.
And you mentioned certain blood pressure medications. So beta blockers, is that what you're talking about? Yep. Okay. So beta blockers, most common one being metoprolol. That's an oldie but a goodie. Works by dampening the sympathetic nervous system. Okay. Yeah. So from what we already learned tonight, parasympathetic and sympathetic. If you're dampening the sympathetic nervous system, it's going to dampen your capacity to move towards ejaculatory orgasm. So,
How can people work with that side effect if they have to be on a beta blocker? Then what can people do?
That's a good point. Beta blockers are used less commonly now. Yeah, they're used more for rate control and when other things haven't worked. So we don't see that as much. And they aren't used at as high of a dosage. So I don't see that as much as I used to. Yeah.
Not as much of a current issue.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, we would just support the processes as much as possible. Even if someone has to take medication, we try to enhance the benefits or the use of that medication through lifestyle medicine. So, again, expanding the sexual menu and resources to enhance that person's quality of life and sexual quality of life and health to support that process. So, yeah, and education, honestly, first and foremost, educating. Sexual health education is sorely lacking in this country. It doesn't even have to be medically accurate to in a sex ed class. So it's quite sad, the statistics around sex education, and it's such a privilege to be able to share this knowledge in this space with all of you to disseminate some of the misinformation around sexual health and especially men's sexual health.
Thank you so much. This is a really important conversation for all of the reasons. Is there anything that any of you want to add before we come to a close?
Would you want to ask any questions?
Yeah. So is
Okay,
something else?
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any?
wait,
Susie had
actually-
something.
I'm telling you, I
Yes,
could talk about this all the time. I live and breathe and swim in all of this. Slaney knows. She's calling seriously. Anywho, one more thing that I think is important to mention is that if you're partnered and you're in a partnership, we're focusing on certainly the person experiencing the changes in their body, but what about when they're with a partner who's also going through some changes in their body and their sexuality? Maybe, for example, if they have a vagina, as with menopause, there's a lot of changes that happen to the vaginal tissue, the vulvovaginal tissue, that can create something called like dyspareunia or painful intercourse. And so if you have a penis and you're engaging in intercourse and your partner all of a sudden is wincing and feeling uncomfortable, what are you thinking as the person, right? Is that you're worried about your partner? I don't want to hurt you. And that then starts to change the dynamic into a more protective, supportive kind of, I don't know how to engage with this because you're hurting and I don't want to hurt you. And so that in and of itself can influence arousal and your ability to stay present, because the focus is really on supporting your partner. So that conversation, I think, really needs to happen in partnerships of what's going on, like during your sexual experience, like how's your partner? What are their verbal and nonverbal cues? What are you worried about in that situation with yourself and or your partner? So talking about it as a coupleship, and again, an erotic allyship, to support everyone in that conversation.
So to bring the breadth of this conversation to a sum, what I have heard from the three of you is that erectile dysfunction, or that this topic, right, erectile dysfunction is something that's incredibly common, and that it's a talking point to bring into a conversation with your partner, with your doctor, to evaluate. Is there a cardiovascular situation happening? Is there diabetes happening? Are there lifestyle interventions that should happen? And to connect back to the body, out of the story of the mind, renormalize it, take care of health, and connect in with your partner again and again and again. I mean, you can't connect to yourself, work with your doctor, and connect with your partner. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Does anybody have any questions? I think if there's an interest, we could open the floor for some questions. And if not, that's okay.
I have one question.
Okay.
A new topical gel the FDA has just approved.
Yeah.
Do you know anything? Do you know enough about it yet to comment on its efficacy?
I'm going to repeat that to make sure it's heard by anybody who's watching. The question is, there's a new topical gel that's been approved by the FDA. Does our panel know anything about this gel?
Yeah.
Is there enough knowledge about it yet?
Yeah. So that came out like in the past couple of weeks, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And so it's interesting that they did it around Father's Day. I really appreciate that.
Is that good marketing? It's really clever.
What is the purpose of the gel?
It helps with erections. Yeah. Generally speaking, and this is just me as a clinical practitioner, even though I have a ponytail and I live in Asheville, in my medical practice, I'm fairly conservative. I like to see how things are going to play out a little bit. So when something hits the market, I'm usually like, okay, and I wait and see. There are things that I know work that have been around for a while, and I use with people all the time, today even, twice. And so I swim in the sea too, right? And so my initial inclination was something that came out in the past week is to wait a little bit and see how this plays out. Because I've also been in practice for over 20 years and have seen many things hit the market that are later recalled. I wish I had a better answer other than just like, maybe, but I want to see how it plays out first.
How long would you want to wait to see, like just in your experience, how much time would you give this particular product before you might consider recommending it?
Sure. So in my mind, there's a rubric of what's risk versus harm.
Sure.
So through the mechanism of action, there's a potential high risk, a bit of longer time, Yeah. And so maybe I'll be able to answer your question better next year. Okay. Do you have anything to add? Have you researched into this much yet?
No.
Okay. Yeah.
It's very new.
Very new.
I'm curious about what impacts it might have on the partner during intercourse, if anything. Like if it's a topical gel, like if you were using a numbing cream, which is sometimes used for ejaculatory control issues, that does influence their partner. So, as far as what they can feel and sensation, and that's one thing that comes to mind, but I have not looked into this particular product you're bringing to my attention. So I appreciate that.
To what you were just saying, actually, some of the challenges with premature ejaculation, which is why you would use a numbing cream. There are numbing creams that can be wiped off, so you're not going to affect your partner so much. But those are also instances where we have seen like beta blockers used. Like, for instance, there's a beta blocker that's often used for public speaking. I didn't take it tonight, by the way. And it helps dampen our sympathetic nervous system so we don't get as nervous.
Wow.
So there are people who can, maybe they're going through this nervous, anxious period with their partner before they're really able to settle down, and they can use that as needed. Some people actually will use an SSRI as needed. I'd be more inclined to use the beta blocker, but yeah, there's lots of options in this field, lots of options. And so when something new hits the market, when there are already lots of options that work really well, I'm kind of like, okay, we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait and see how it plays out, just to minimize any potential risks.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Any other questions in the audience?
Yeah.
I'm a psychotherapist in town, and I work with a lot of people who have substance use disorders. Can you speak a little bit to the effects of alcohol?
Okay, I'm going to repeat that for the camera. A question from a psychotherapist saying that she works with a lot of people who have alcohol and substance abuse disorders, and can we speak to how that impacts this process?
So alcohol is a depressant, and it will inhibit the process of sexual function. So it will make it very challenging to get an erection in that time. I think Dr. Bryan could speak to the actual biochemistry that's going on with alcohol. And also just the impacts on the overall body that then trickles into a sexual dysfunction from the use of misuse or chronic use of a particular substance. And certainly thinking about withdrawal symptoms associated with substances and getting off of certain medications or substances that might induce sexual dysfunction just from that process alone. So,
Yeah. I'll take the. So alcohol, cocaine. What other substances? So I know what talks. Opiates. Oh yeah.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Yeah. So some people will use substances because of the narratives they have going into intimate encounters. Some people to decrease their anxiety. Some people, they have a background history of substance abuse. Cocaine has powerful activity on your vasculature, and so that's going to affect your functioning in not a good way. Okay. THC products, we mentioned the effects of that on your sex hormone binding globulin, and also potentially on decreased muscle mass and the effects that has on building up adipose or fat tissue. And we talk about aromatase in the fat tissue and that increasing estrogen. It's just this kind of feed forward thing. And we see this more in chronic users, heavy users, I'd say. Let's see, other things of use, opioids. So that hits on a lot of different fronts. There are opioid receptors all throughout the body. And can't speak to that one with a lot of authority, other than just saying about the depressive effects that has on the whole system. Yeah. Can you speak to that one much?
I can say that with weaning off of opioids can induce ejaculatory frequency as far as spontaneity. There's almost like a dysregulation that's occurring within the sexual processes as far as sexual function. So the person might experience more intense nocturnal erections, sometimes can be painful at times. There's more of this mismatch between the nerves and the muscles and the entire cascade of the physiology that is changing and trying to balance. So there is some process as far as the withdrawal that I'm aware of. We particularly work with a lot of folks who have sexual pain, and they are often put on opioids that then induce opioid-induced hyperalgesia or making the pain more sensitive. It can be somewhat maybe beneficial to take the edge off, but being on an opiate chronically is going to actually backfire and make the problem worse. And it's also working on the immune system by dampening the power of their immune system. So it's actually working on the nervous system, but sacrificing another, if that makes sense. So it's really complex as far as, opioid medications and then weaning off of them, and certainly tapering very slowly to reduce and mitigate some of the effects of that.
Does that answer your question? Is that what you were?
helps. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Anybody wanna ask?
I was going to touch upon one thing that you had mentioned, which is this time in life where men and women are going through big body changes. Perimenopause for women, where you can get genital urinary changes. Menopause. Did I get it right?
Yeah, you did.
Okay,
You
good.
did. Yes, it's a
It
mouthful.
used to be called something else.
Yes.
And so often this has to do with decreased estrogen levels in the body associated with moving from perimenopause into menopause. And it's actually something fairly easy to treat. Okay. So this is another one of those suffering in silence things that happens. People, again, have this narrative, like this is just the way it is. We're closing up shop. It's that time of life. It's the way it is. Doesn't have to be. Not at all. And it's one of those things that is very gratifying to help someone with because it's so easy to treat and it so affects their quality of life. As you said, it's one of the sexual health is one of the pillars of lifestyle, right, and total health. And so getting it out, even though we will be talking about erectile dysfunctions, intimacy can be a solo act, but it's often a couple act. And vaginal health in perimenopause and menopause is something that's fairly easy to treat and doesn't get enough attention. So, yeah.
Thank you for speaking to that as well. Okay, I want to be respectful of time. It's 7:10. So maybe one other question if anybody has a question. Otherwise, I think we should probably wrap up. Yeah.
So you said, you have many ratings and 90s, you have normal sex life, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that should be the normal, I mean, you can,
Well,
what do you, I'm
Yeah.
wondering, what should I expect? You
that
know?
was like a slow pitch. Just you asked me to hit this out of the park for a closer. Thank you. So what is normal,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And what is normal as someone ages into their 80s and 90s?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest takeaways is that the narratives we have around intimacy and sexuality are wacky. The things that we're shown on the screen, whatever screens we may be looking at, so weird. The expectations they put in people's heads about what we should do and how we should do it and how long we should do it. It's nothing natural. And so this shift from the rocket ship to an orgasm to intimacy, that can happen at any age, okay? To penetrative intercourse, that can also happen at any age. So a male that is staying healthy and no diabetes, or at least the blood sugars are under control. Cardiovascular disease has been addressed. There's nothing from a traumatic perspective. They haven't had their prostate removed and that's created nerve damage or something like that. Like there's nothing on an organic basis, but organic can be physical, to inhibit things. Things can work well. And sometimes medication assistance is needed. Sometimes other things are needed, but people have, I can't tell you, and this really makes me happy, how many times I've heard this. Someone is in their 70s, they lose their partner, which is sad, they're grieving. And a few years down the road, they come in, big old smile on their face. They're like a decade younger. I'm like, what's going on with you, man? He's like, I'm at the love of my life. I'm like, what? And I'm thinking of one in particular I was talking to like a couple weeks ago. And he's like, I was on a Rhodes Scholars trip. It's amazing. And we're just like traveling and then like having the best sex I've ever had. It's like 75. And, I hear this often. So it lets me know that these things are possible. And sometimes it's not happening because psycho-emotional things happening over time, bigger picture questions, or maybe it could be the guy, it could be the woman. It's a couple together. Yep.
So to sum what I heard.
They may want to say something.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I can see your face.
I can feel it. It's bubbling. I'm like,
I was like, oh my gosh, that's so good. And I want to, so to your question, thank you for asking that, because what to expect as a penis gets older, right? Yes, I mentioned waxing and waning of erection might be more common and frequent. Needing more stimulation and different types of stimulation for longer periods of time is also normal. A longer refractory period, meaning time to get another erection after you've already climaxed might be longer. Okay, it might be several hours. It also might be several days. That is also quite normal and healthy in that experience over one's lifetime. What is the challenge around that is certainly, well, to your question, well, what is sex? What is sex? What's my definition of sex? And we're often told it's penis and vagina. It's intercourse, but it's so much more than that. And so it really is challenging, as Dr. Bryan said, the paradigm and the narrative around what is sex, because you can have a very satisfying sex life that has no penis and vagina sex in it, right? And recognizing that that is important for some men and really important as part of their ability to connect with themselves. And we're all here to support, obviously, in any way, shape, or form, to connect with that person as authentically, to help them connect with themselves as authentically as possible. But there is a piece around good enough sex. You know, it's not going to be, you know, knock the ball out of the park. I'm not a baseball player, so, you know, a home run every single time, which is why having mental flexibility around your experiences is crucial in order to have a satisfying sexual experience. It does liberate. It's liberating to have that flexibility around our experiences. Because it really is then about, I can just tap into what this experience has to offer rather than what can I do to make this happen in this particular way. It's very rigid. It's a very rigid way of thinking around sexuality.
Shifting from how can I perform to how can I experience?
Pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, to pleasure, to sensation.
And a soft penis can be very pleasurable. And that's an exercise, actually. So that we use. It's
There's your homework.
Pleasuring,
Okay.
everyone's homework.
Home-
Pleasuring your soft penis. It's not about the erection. Enjoy what your penis soft has to offer. You've probably not even explored that.
We
That's a
just-
great place to end. I think.
We are so gonna lift that for a little
For
soundbite.
soundbite?
Yeah.
Maybe we All right, you guys. Round of applause for our panel. Thank you so much, you guys.
And might I just say, thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
This is really,
Yeah.
you know, that can be a vulnerable and it's a courageous thing to come and have these conversations. So we really, really appreciate your support and your, you know, connection with all of this.
Yeah.
Very much.
Putting this on because it needs to be talked
It does.
You know,
Yeah.
It really is sad that our whole society is so hung up on all this stuff.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
important to all this.
Oh yeah. Very much so.
And we can't co-create a safe space without showing up. And so thank you for coming. Thanks for being here.
Thank
guys.
you.
And thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Bryan.
Thank you,
Ariana.
Yeah. Ariana orchestrated all of
Yes,
this, so
yes.
thank you for being the amazing moderator that you are.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
All
Yes.
right.
Have
Have
a
a
great
great
you.
night, everyone.
Yeah.
Take care.
Bye.
If you have other questions that you think about afterwards, feel free to email them to me and I will hit the button.
Yeah, good job. That turned out great. We're totally gonna lift that. We